15,000 men. Let that sink in for a moment. Not 15,000 casualties on a battlefield. 15,000 prisoners, lined up, processed, systematically blinded in an operation that took days to complete. 150 groups of 100. In each group, 99 men had both eyes removed. The 100th man was left with one functioning eye. Here is what most people don't know. That single eye was not mercy. It was logistics. One man to guide 99 others home. Multiply that by 150. Now you have 150 columns of blinded soldiers shuffling through the Balkan mountains. Each column led by a single terrified man who can see exactly what was done to everyone behind him. When the first columns reached the Bulgarian capital, Tsar Samuel stood on the walls and watched them coming. He saw the evidence of what one man had decided to do. He collapsed on the spot. 2 days later, dead. Stroke, shock, a heart that simply could not process what was crawling toward his city. The man who ordered this was 62 years old. He had been emperor for 49 years. He was the longest reigning ruler in the history of the Roman Empire, all 2,000 years of it. He saved Byzantium from destruction. He filled its treasury with more gold than any emperor before him. He expanded the empire from the Danube to the Caucasus. He died having never married, having never rested, having never stopped fighting for a single year of his adult life. And almost nobody knows his name. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Basil II, the Bulgar Slayer. And you are about to understand why the most terrifying rulers are not the ones who kill. They are the ones who make you wish you had been killed. Buckle up. April 22nd, 960 AD. Constantinople, the greatest city in the Christian world. Population, roughly 500,000. For comparison, Paris at this moment has about 20,000 people living in mud and wood. Constantinople has aqueducts, granaries, a university, imperial palaces, and walls that have never been breached. Into this city, into the imperial palace, a 2-year-old child is carried in purple silk. His name is Basil. He cannot read the ceremony. He can barely stand through it. The patriarch places a crown on his head. The Senate kneels. The armies, at least in theory, now answer to a toddler. Here is the brutal truth about Byzantine imperial politics. Being crowned co-emperor at age 2, that is not a blessing. That is a target. The Byzantine court was a machine designed to consume emperors. Of the 88 Byzantine emperors who ruled between Constantine and the final fall in 1453, nearly half were deposed, blinded, mutilated, or murdered by their own court. Being crowned at 2 just meant you had a longer window in which someone could kill you. But Basil survived, and not because he was protected, because he learned, slowly, silently, over decades, to become the most dangerous man in any room. Here is what you need to understand about Basil's childhood. He was the heir, but he was never the power. His father, Romanos II, died when Basil was 5. Poisoned, probably. His mother, Theophano, married the general Nikephoros Phocas to keep the throne stable. Nikephoros was then murdered, hacked to death in his own bedchamber by Theophano's next lover, John Tzimiskes, who then became emperor. Basil, meanwhile, was still a child, still wearing the purple, still officially co-emperor. But nobody asked him anything. Nobody consulted him. He was a decoration, a living symbol of imperial legitimacy, while grown men murdered each other for actual power. And you know very damn well what that does to a person. Let that sink in for a moment. Spend your entire childhood watching men kill for power while pretending you are the power, and see what kind of adult comes out the other side. To understand what Basil became, you have to understand what he was born into, and that requires going back, further back than you might expect. The 7th century. The Roman world is dying. Not slowly, not gracefully, violently. From the south, the Arab conquests are moving faster than any empire can respond. In the span of a single generation, not centuries, decades, the empire loses Egypt, Syria, North Africa, the wealthiest provinces, the grain that fed Constantinople, the cities that produced philosophy and theology. Gone. All of it. The empire shrinks by 2/3. Emperor Heraclius, the man who had defeated the Persians in the greatest war Rome had ever fought, watches his life's work dissolve. In his final years, he does something symbolic but devastating. He abandons the ancient Latin title Augustus and replaces it with the Greek Basileus. Rome is no longer a Latin-speaking global state. It is now a Greek-speaking, walled-in, pious Orthodox fortress. The Roman Empire, the real one, the one that had ruled the Mediterranean for 600 years, effectively ends in the 7th century. What survives is something new. Historians call it Byzantium. The people who lived there called it Rome. They were the last Romans, and they were surrounded. Then came the sieges. The largest Arab armies ever assembled arrived at the walls of Constantinople. Each time, the city should have fallen. It had fewer soldiers, fewer ships, fewer resources. It survived because of 2 things: the Theodosian walls, the greatest fortification ever built, and Greek fire. This was the ancient world's napalm, a liquid that ignited on contact with water. A weapon so secret that its exact formula is still unknown today, lost to history. Arab ships approaching the seawalls would see Byzantine dromons, war galleys, turn toward them with bronze tubes mounted on the prow. And then, fire. On the water. Burning ships, burning men, burning sea. The Arab fleet turned to ash in the waters of the Bosphorus. If those walls had fallen, if that fire had not burned, the history of Europe would have been written in Arabic. Constantinople was the unyielding sentry at the gates of the East, and it held. But survival is not the same as strength. For nearly 100 years, the empire tore itself apart from the inside. The conflict was called iconoclasm, a war over whether religious icons should be venerated or destroyed. It sounds abstract to modern ears. It was not abstract. It was an attempt by the emperor to exert absolute control over the church. Bishops were deposed, monasteries were raided, mosaics were scraped from walls, families were divided. The empire spent a century fighting itself over images of Christ, while its enemies grew stronger on every border. Eventually, the icons returned. The empire stabilized, but the Roman soul had changed. It was now fully draped in the mysticism of Eastern Christianity. This was the empire Basil inherited, a fortress state, a survivor, a civilization that had looked extinction in the face twice and lived. But it had not yet recovered its strength. That was the task waiting for the boy in purple. By the time Basil reached adulthood, his family, the Macedonian Dynasty, had been ruling for nearly a century. They were not Macedonians. Basil I, the founder, was a peasant from the Armenian borderlands who had risen through murder and cunning to seize the throne. He was illiterate. He had never held a sword before joining the army. And he became the founder of the most successful dynasty in Byzantine history. Because this is what Byzantium looked like. A system where a peasant could become emperor, where a eunuch could become the most powerful official in the state, where a woman could rule an empire through her sons. It was brutal, it was unstable, and it produced some of the most effective rulers in history, because only the effective ones survived. But here is the thing about dynasties: they produce heirs, and heirs are rarely as good as founders. Basil II's great-grandfather was a genius. His grandfather was competent. His father, Romanos II, was young, handsome, and mostly interested in hunting and feasting. When Romanos died at 24, poisoned probably by his own wife, the empire was being run by a rotating cast of generals who kept marrying Basil's mother and then getting murdered by her next lover. This is the childhood we are talking about. A court where your mother's bedroom decides who commands the armies, where you wear the crown but hold no power, where you learn before you can read that trust is a luxury you cannot afford. Basil watched, Basil waited, Basil learned, and when he finally took power in 976 at the age of 18, he had spent 16 years watching the most dangerous political system in the medieval world consume everyone around him. He was not supposed to survive. He was supposed to be a footnote, another puppet emperor controlled by the generals and the bureaucrats. Nobody expected him to fight back. Here is the brutal truth: they were wrong about everything. 986 AD. Basil is 28 years old. He has been ruling, actually ruling, for 10 years. And he has made his first major decision as a military commander: to invade Bulgaria. The Bulgarian Empire, under Tsar Samuel, has been expanding into Byzantine territory for years. Basil decides to end the threat personally. He leads an army of 30,000 men through the Balkan mountain passes toward the Bulgarian capital. This is the moment where confident young emperors either become legends or become dead. The mountain pass is called the Gate of Trajan, narrow, forested, perfect for an ambush. Basil, inexperienced, overconfident, walks his army directly into it. The Bulgarians had been waiting. They held the high ground on both sides. When the Byzantine column was fully committed to the pass, the Bulgarians attacked from above. Arrows, rocks, a coordinated assault that shattered the Byzantine formation within minutes. Basil's army disintegrated. His elite Armenian infantry, the core of his force, was slaughtered. The imperial camp was overrun. The imperial tent, the imperial treasury, the imperial standards, all captured. Basil himself barely escaped. The accounts say he fled through the mountains with a handful of guards, leaving behind everything: his army, his dignity, his reputation. Let that sink in for a moment. The emperor of the Roman Empire, the heir of Augustus and Constantine, running for his life through a Balkan mountain pass while his army is butchered behind him. This was the kind of defeat that ended emperors. Half of Byzantine emperors were deposed after military failures like this. The court in Constantinople smelled blood. The generals who had always resented Basil's attempts to actually rule, rather than being their puppet, began plotting. Within months, two of the empire's most powerful military commanders, Bardas Skleros and Bardas Phocas, would launch full-scale rebellions. Basil was 28, humiliated, facing civil war on multiple fronts. Here is what most people do not know. This moment, the Gate of Trajan, the flight through the mountains, the humiliation, this is when Basil II became Basil, the Bulgar Slayer. Not before. Not despite this defeat. Because of it. The man who crawled out of that mountain pass was not the same man who had marched in. The young emperor who wanted glory had died in those mountains. What came down was something else entirely. When Basil returned to Constantinople, he did something no one expected. He did not retreat to the palace. He did not surround himself with courtiers. He did not even retaliate against the rebellious generals, not yet. Instead, he turned to the one force that had never betrayed him, the Rus, the Vikings of the East. He made an alliance with Vladimir the Great of Kiev, offering his sister Anna in marriage, a Byzantine princess, born in the purple, to a barbarian king. The court was horrified. Basil did not care. The deal came with 6,000 Varangian warriors, the most feared heavy infantry in the world. Norsemen who had traveled down the rivers of Russia, armored in chainmail, wielding massive two-handed axes. They would become Basil's personal guard, and they would never leave his side. Then he went to war. Not against the Bulgarians, not yet. Against his own empire. The civil war against Phocis and Skleros lasted years. Basil fought it with a cold, methodical patience that shocked everyone who had known the impulsive young emperor. He did not rush. He did not gamble. He wore down his enemies the way weather wears down stone. When Phocis died of a heart attack in the middle of a battle, a moment so dramatic that chroniclers recorded it as divine intervention, the rebellion collapsed. Basil had survived, and the man who emerged from the civil war was unrecognizable. Here is the brutal truth about what Basil became. He stopped being an emperor in any recognizable sense. He became something closer to a living weapon. He slept among his troops. He ate what they ate. He wore the same armor for decades, not ceremonial armor, battle armor. Dented and repaired so many times, the original metal was barely visible beneath the patches. He never married, never had children, never showed interest in luxury, entertainment, or anything that was not directly related to the survival and expansion of the empire. The court hated him for it. The court wanted an emperor who threw banquets, who wore silk, who performed the theater of imperial power. Basil gave them a soldier who could go weeks without changing his clothes, and who considered a military camp more comfortable than the imperial palace. You cannot corrupt a man who does not want anything you have to offer. What followed was one of the most relentless military campaigns in medieval history. Basil did not fight Bulgaria in a single dramatic war. He fought Bulgaria for 25 years, not continuously, but annually. Every single year, when the mountain passes cleared in spring, Basil marched. He did not seek decisive battles. He did not try to conquer the Bulgarian capital in one dramatic stroke. He took one fortress, then another, then another. Year after year, campaign after campaign. The Bulgarians could not match this pace. No medieval state could indefinitely sustain annual invasions from an enemy who never stopped, never negotiated in good faith, and never accepted anything less than total victory. Samuel, the Bulgarian Tsar, was a brilliant commander in his own. But every year, when spring came, Basil was back. And every year, the Bulgarian position was slightly weaker than the year before. Because this is what total war looks like. Not a dramatic clash of armies, not a single decisive day. A grinding, methodical, 25-year campaign of exhaustion conducted by a man who had decided that the only acceptable outcome was the complete destruction of the Bulgarian state. By 1014, Samuel's army had been cornered. The final confrontation was coming. And the man who emerged from 25 years of annual warfare was about to make a decision that would echo through history for 1,000 years. July 29th, 1014, the Valley of Kleidion. the key pass that controlled the route into the Bulgarian heartland. Samuel had blocked the pass with wooden walls and stationed his main army there, confident that the position was impregnable. Basil studied the position, and then he did something Samuel had not anticipated. He sent a separate force under his general Nikephoros Xiphias to find another way through the mountains. Xiphias led his men on a brutal march through pathless terrain, circling behind the Bulgarian position. On July 29th, while Basil attacked the Bulgarian front, Xiphias appeared behind them. The Bulgarian army was trapped between two Byzantine forces. The result was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Byzantine sources claim 15,000 Bulgarian soldiers were captured. Even if the real number was smaller, and medieval chroniclers always inflated, the scale of the victory was unprecedented. Samuel himself escaped, barely, fleeing on his son's horse. Now, here is where the story becomes something else entirely. Basil had 15,000 prisoners. This is the moment that defined him. Most commanders in his position would have done one of two things: execute the prisoners or ransom them. Execution was expensive and politically costly. Ransom meant the same soldiers could fight again next year. Basil chose a third option, the one no one had ever chosen on this scale. He ordered every prisoner blinded, all 15,000. The operation took days. The logistics were as calculated as anything in the 25-year campaign. The prisoners were divided into groups of 100. 99 were fully blinded. One was left with a single eye. Not out of mercy, out of calculation. Someone had to guide the column home. 150 columns of blinded men, each led by a single eye. 150 columns stretching for miles through the mountain passes. 150 columns, each one a message. Walk, find your czar. Show him what I have done. Show him what happens when you fight me for 25 years. Let that sink in for a moment. Not a massacre, not a mass execution. Something worse, something calculated. Basil did not want to kill those 15,000 men. Dead men do not tell stories. Dead men do not become an economic burden on their homeland. Dead men do not walk through mountain passes for weeks, arriving at their capital as living monuments to their enemies' ruthlessness. Basil understood something that most conquerors never learn. Terror is not about what you do to the dead. Terror is about what you leave alive. The columns began to arrive at Samuel's capital months later. They had walked through the mountain passes in the blind, literally, led by their single-eyed guides, surviving on whatever they could find, losing men to starvation and infection along the way. Samuel stood on the walls and watched them coming. 150 columns, the evidence of what one man had decided to do. Historians record that Samuel collapsed on the spot. He suffered a stroke. 2 days later, October 6th, 1014, he was dead. The Tsar of Bulgaria, the man who had fought Basil for a quarter century, died not from a sword or an arrow or poison. He died of shock. His heart could not process what was crawling toward his city. His son, Gavril Radomir, tried to continue the fight. He was murdered by his own cousin within a year. The cousin tried to negotiate. Basil was not interested in negotiation. By 1018, 4 years after Kleidion, the Bulgarian Empire ceased to exist. Bulgaria became a Byzantine province. The Bulgarian Church was subordinated to Constantinople.
the Bulgarian royal family was taken to Byzantium in chains. And the man who had accomplished all of this did not celebrate. He did not hold a triumph.
He simply kept working, because there was always another border to secure, another rebellion to crush, another piece of the empire that needed attention. He was not a conqueror in the theatrical sense. He was a machine. Under Basil II, the Byzantine Empire reached its greatest extent since the 7th century. The Danube frontier, lost for centuries, was restored and fortified. The empire pushed into the Caucasus, absorbing Armenian and Georgian principalities. Southern Italy was secured against both Muslim raiders and Norman adventurers. The treasury, the same treasury Basil had found depleted by decades of court extravagance, was overflowing. Byzantine sources claim there was so much gold that the vaults beneath the imperial palace could not contain it all. New storage chambers had to be excavated. More importantly, Basil reformed the tax system. The great landowners of Anatolia, the Dynatoi, the powerful families who had accumulated vast estates and were threatening to turn free peasants into serfs, were systematically broken. Basil's land laws forced them to return property they had acquired illegally. He made enemies of the entire aristocracy. He did not care. The empire's strength, he understood, came from its free peasant farmers, the men who paid taxes and filled the army. A strong peasantry meant a strong state. A strong aristocracy meant a weak state. Basil chose the peasants every single time. And then, in December of 1025, at the age of 67, Basil II died. He had been emperor for 49 years, longer than any Roman emperor in history. Augustus ruled for 41, Constantine for 31, Justinian for 38. Basil II, 49. He died in his bed, an achievement in itself for a Byzantine emperor. He died having never married, having never produced an heir, having never rested. The treasury was full, the borders were secure, the empire was at its peak, and he had left no one to continue what he had built. This is when the story turns from triumph to tragedy. Basil's brother, Constantine VIII, had been co-emperor for decades, technically an equal ruler, in practice a non-entity. Basil made every decision. Constantine attended ceremonies. Basil slept in military camps. Constantine slept in the palace. Basil fought wars. Constantine attended banquets. For 63 years, his entire life, Constantine had been the decorative brother, the one who wore the purple and smiled and never had to make a decision that mattered. And then, at the age of 65, he was suddenly the sole emperor. Here is the brutal truth. Constantine VIII had spent 6 decades learning absolutely nothing about how to govern. He had learned how to be an emperor in appearance only. Now he had to be one in reality. The result was catastrophic. Within 3 years, Constantine had undone much of what Basil had spent decades building. He appointed incompetent favorites to key positions. He drained the treasury on lavish displays. He allowed the aristocratic families Basil had suppressed to reassert their power. The land laws, Basil's most important domestic achievement, were ignored and then abandoned. the careful balance between central authority and provincial power collapsed. Constantine VIII died in 1028, having ruled alone for just 3 years. He left no male heir either, only 2 daughters, Zoe and Theodora, who would spend the next decades in a chaotic succession of marriages, depositions, and palace intrigue. The contrast between the brothers is one of history's sharper ironies. The warrior emperor who saved the dynasty produced no heir. The decorative co-emperor who outlived him nearly lost everything within 3 years. And the tragedy does not stop there. The empire Basil had built, the strongest, richest, most expansive Byzantium in 4 centuries, would begin to collapse within a single generation of his death. Because when you build an empire entirely on the force of one man's will, what happens when that man is gone? Just 46 years after Basil's death, the Byzantine army, under Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, confronts the Seljuk Turks under Sultan Alp Arslan at Manzikert in eastern Anatolia. The battle should have been winnable. The Byzantine army was large, professional, well supplied. But the political rot that had set in after Basil's death had hollowed out the command structure. One of Romanos's own generals, Andronikos Doukas, betrayed him mid-battle, spreading a rumor that the emperor had been killed, withdrawing his troops. The Byzantine line collapsed. Romanos was captured. The Seljuk victory opened the gates of Anatolia, the empire's human reservoir, its source of soldiers, its agricultural heartland, to Turkish settlement. Within decades, Anatolia was lost. The empire that Basil had expanded from the Danube to the Caucasus became a headless body, squeezed into the Balkans and coastal cities, losing the logistical and military depth that had sustained it for centuries. This was the beginning of the end. It would take another 400 years for Constantinople to finally fall. But the death warrant was signed at Manzikert. And Manzikert happened because the system Basil had held together through sheer personal force collapsed the moment he was no longer in it. He had saved the empire. He had made it stronger than it had been in centuries. But he had not built an empire that could survive without him. Because this is what absolute power looks like. It works brilliantly while the right person holds it, and it fails catastrophically when they are gone. Basil II was buried not in the great imperial mausoleum of the Holy Apostles, where Constantine and Justinian lay, but in a smaller church at the Hebdomon outside the city walls. His own request. The man who had expanded the empire to its medieval peak chose to be buried in a modest tomb, away from the emperors of the past. He had always been different. He was different to the end. So why does nobody know his name? Part of it is geography. The Byzantine Empire has always been the forgotten half of Roman history. The eastern half, the Greek-speaking Orthodox half that Western European historians have spent 1,000 years ignoring or dismissing. Part of it is narrative. Basil II's story lacks the dramatic arc of a Julius Caesar. The rise, the triumph, the assassination. Instead, you get a 2-year-old crowned emperor, a 28-year-old humiliated at the Gate of Trajan, a 60-year-old who blinds 15,000 men, and a 67-year-old who dies in his bed, leaving the treasury full and the empire at its peak. It is a story about patience, not drama, About grinding, not exploding. About a man who became a weapon and used himself until there was nothing left. And part of it is the simple tragedy of what came after. Basil saved the empire, but his brother and the generations that followed squandered everything he built. History remembers the fall of Constantinople in 1453. It forgets the man who 400 years earlier gave the empire 4 extra centuries of life. The man who crawled out of a mountain pass as a humiliated young emperor and became the most terrifying ruler in Byzantine history. The man who understood that terror is not about killing. It is about what you leave alive. The man who never married, never rested, never stopped. Ladies and gentlemen, Basil II, the Bulgar Slayer, the longest reigning Roman emperor, and the man you will never forget again. Because here is the thing about history. It does not remember the patient. It does not remember the methodical. It remembers the dramatic, the assassinations, the conquests, the falls. But the empires are built by the patient. The borders are secured by the methodical. The treasuries are filled by the men who never needed anyone to know their name. If you want more stories about the rulers history chose to erase, the ones who built the world and then were buried underneath it, subscribe now. Because their stories were written down, preserved, and told again and again through the centuries. Stories that will never fade, as long as someone remembers to tell them. Thank you for watching.